Okay, let's start because it's not only PRG today here. We have some friends who joined us because it was advertised more broadly. So it's good to welcome you all to this meeting and happy UN Day to everybody. For me, it is my national day, or in addition to the national day, it is really my global holiday. And I wish it were the same for everybody in the world. But I think most people have missed it today, what it is. And if they knew about it, I'm not sure whether they would be clearly celebrating or observing or criticizing or whatever. So anyway, it's a day to think about the UN again and can inspire us. The topic is emerging global geopolitics and the United Nations, and a lot is changing. A lot is things that were not predicted, like wars of the traditional type, wars that can divide us, the world in camps that can fight again another world war. Of course, climate change, pandemics. So how is the UN reacting? How we see from our experience as former UN staff members, which is the core of the peacemaking reflection group, how other friends see it, and how is the Summit of the Future process dealing with that, or is it dealing with this? Should we go beyond the periodic change of UN organs and procedures to something more radical, to rethink the UN for the next phase of human development? For me, as I said in the previous meeting where I was, I think we need to rethink the basics, even to rebuild international cooperation, unity in diversity, if we want to preserve the UN and really build a new ship for the future and not just repaint the 1945 boat that we may have. So we'll see what our speakers think, and then everybody's welcome to join into the discussion. And I'm very glad and honored to have our speakers here. To introduce them briefly, Yoriko Yasukawa is the Vice President of FOGS, and before a senior official of the United Nations, UNICEF, resident coordinator in several Latin American countries, also worked in Southeast Asia. So Yoriko, a lot of experience, the same with Manuela Tortora, who is joining us from Geneva, and she has worked there for UNCTAD at senior level, and she is also the vice president of Grey Cells, which is the Association of Former International Civil Servants for Development, and sister organization to the FOGS. And then we have also Francis Martin O'Donnell, or Frank as we call him, who is also a former senior UN and UNDP official, resident coordinator, among other places in Ukraine, relatively recently. So our group has been, the PRG has been trying to deal, to think about what is happening in the world. We have sent letters to the Secretary General asking him to be more proactive on Ukraine. We have recently issued a statement on the Middle East, what's happening there. We try to be balanced, remain international civil servants in mind, and have a positive influence if they're after retirement or separation from service. Thanks to also all others who are with us. And let's start with our speakers, about 5 minutes each, starting with Yoriko. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Costa Rica, which is where I am right now. Thank you, Yorgos. And first of all, thanks to Yorgos and the other colleagues who put together the statement on the Israel-Gaza crisis. I thought it was really good. And I think it would be good if we could, all of us really try to spread it around far and wide. I don't really have a structured speech or any sort of brilliant insights into the current geopolitical situation. But what I wanted to share with you is just this concern that beyond the specific crises that we're facing, whether it's the Israel-Gaza conflict or Ukraine, I think, these conflicts in particular have really sort of had the effect of shifting, or maybe it's really reinforcing a very negative and destructive global narrative, whereby on the side of the West and the great powers, it's such a dangerous world. Now and the way that we're going to deal with it is to arm ourselves to the teeth. And that has concrete consequences, like in my own country, which has decided to double its defense spending, despite having a constitution that says we're not even supposed to maintain an army. Germany as well. And then in the global South, I think it's having the effect of making people think, well, that just kind of, validates the suspicion that we had all along, that these people don't really care about us. They're only interested in us to use us to get us on whatever side their interests are in. They're not really interested in development or improving the quality of life of people. So I was thinking that a group like ours could really play an important role in changing and shifting that narrative. Because I think all of us have pretty big networks of people, many of whom I think are influential in different spheres of the world, and that we can leverage to spread a message in the sense of, well, no, that's not really the way we ought to be going. We can do better than that. I mean, in my own experience, which has been mainly been at the country level, I think the articulating and communicating a positive narrative, I mean, one that does point out the things that are wrong with the country, but at the same time points the way for a different change, different direction. That says that we can do better, and we can do this. We've done it in the past. We can do it again. In my experience, does have an important impact. And I think it can happen at the global level as well. I don't have a specific suggestion right now about what exactly to do, but I guess my hope is that we can use the networks that we have to shift this negative narrative in another direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuriko. And we're talking about a new narrative, a new infrastructure for peace, more and resilience, sustainability. And I think Manuela may have an answer. International Geneva could be part of the answer. Let's listen to her.
I hope so. I'm not sure how, but certainly, yes, when we talk about positive, constructive attitude and mindset, if we compare Geneva with New York or the overall atmosphere worldwide, certainly Geneva is well placed. We have some oxygen and some energy here that is missing in many, many places. Thank you, Georgios, for this invitation, and thank you also for the title that you put on the Geneva topic. The future of the UN is closer to Geneva than New York. Indeed, yes, I think there is something there. And let me try to explain what are the components of that being closer to Geneva than New York in terms of the future of multilateralism. First, a quick reminder, what is the international Geneva ecosystem, as we call it here, and why it matters a lot. What it is really an ecosystem, a very complex one, encompassing 40 international organizations, including 5 specialized agencies, including more than 400 NGOs revolving around UN topics, 180 permanent missions, so a population of diplomats, experts, researchers, academics that really make it very, very rich in such a concentrated, small small place, and with an agenda which is also very unique because it is extremely diverse and rich. It goes from global health to migration, from climate change to gender issues, social policies to telecommunications, internet governance, economic development, international trade issues, and then, of course, human rights and many, many other things. So again, a concentration of the important topics that, again, I will use Giorgio's vocabulary, address all the non-military threats and all the roots of the multifaceted crisis that we have today in one single place at the multilateral level. It's quite amazing, I must say. And we feel, I mean, the Geneva community, this ecosystem, we feel that all this agenda and this knowledge should lead the policymakers, should lead the diplomats, and particularly should lead what is happening or not happening in New York at the highest political level, and particularly having the Security Council in mind, but not only. Now, why it matters in this debate on the future of multilateralism? Not only because of what I said, which I hope is quite obvious, but also because today, the normative and the regulatory work that is being done in Geneva based on consensus is really at the core of the management of the globalization issues that we face from all angles. And it is a practical way on a daily basis to implement concretely the values of the Charter and the SDGs. So every day, for instance, a global health regulation or an ILO convention is adopted, or an international trade agreement or decision is taken, it is a way to implement the Charter and to achieve the SDGs. So this normative regulatory work really matters a lot. Secondly, also what we learn and what we have on a daily basis in Geneva in this wide agenda is the concrete transformation of this normative work into concrete assistance at the country level. So we really address the human beings' needs at the country level based on our knowledge and based on the norms and standards and indicators and statistics that we have in Geneva. And finally, last but not least, Geneva is an amazing puzzle. It is really a crossroads of intersectoral, multidisciplinary topics like in none other UN headquarters. Crossing, for instance, migration and climate change, global health and intellectual property, social security and human rights, economic development and foreign investment. So you name a list of intersectoral topics that are being analyzed, addressed, discussed, negotiated like nowhere else, as far as I know, with such an intensity of exchanges between diplomats and experts. Now, finally, how to strengthen the bridges between New York and Geneva, because I really need that. We need more bridges to really take into account, to really benefit from what comes from this multilateral amazing place. I can really think that building these bridges should have as a goal building trust in New York, taking into account the experience of the 100 years of diplomatic exchanges and negotiations here in Geneva in all the so-called technical issues that are, at the end of the day, as I said, the non-military threats. So building trust in New York should also take into account what we learn in the diplomacy Geneva-based. Of course, what I have in mind is the understanding of the global public goods that are being addressed in Geneva and should be also exported in a way to the New York agenda, to the New York processes, but not just as a collateral, decorative topic, because it's nice to talk about economic and social and environmental issues, but because they are at the core of the future of multilateral agenda, together with the political issues, and should not be separated from them. So the idea of Fox's ideas of a global resilience council is certainly an instrument that fits squarely into that landscape, Geneva landscape, also because it is an encompassing notion that can cover the whole of the UN agenda in a coherent fashion to convey the UN values in one single approach. Number two, what we need is to mobilize civil society. Every day I wonder, where are the Greta Thunbergs, activists taking to the streets to shout for peace, for instance, or for economic development, and not only for environmental issues, which are fine, but again, it's not enough. And finally, last but not least, involve also all players. All players, I mean, of course, diplomats, policymakers, obviously, young generations, obviously, but seniors too, because we have white hair, but we are still around, right? And quite active as so far as I am and many others concerned, but also include something that is also very Geneva specific, which is the private sector. And here in Geneva, there is a knowledge, there is an expertise, there is a sort of tradition, a very good one, positive one, to include the private sector, the business sector into the decision-making processes in a constructive way. Certainly, I think much more constructive than what is done on the other side of the Atlantic, in a more positive way. I will stop here. Thank you very much, Georgios.
Thank you. Thank you, Manuela, because really you brought this Geneva as a place, but also Geneva as a history, 100 years plus of international civil service, started there with the League of Nations. Today, all this that it offers really practically in the development, humanitarian, normative, and regulatory field. And we have to think a lot on how to integrate all this and build the bridges that you mentioned. Just before going to Frank, to say a welcome to also colleagues from another network that Fox is very active in, which is the Global South Perspectives Network. Thanks to all the colleagues from there who are with us today, and I hope that they will take the floor afterwards in the discussion. Now let's go to Frank, the last introductory statement, but not least. And of course, we left him last because we want that hope, the desperate hope that he can add to our discussion. And that's a book, an upcoming book of his also, that he can talk to us about. Thank you.
Thank you, Yorgos. And thank you, Eurico and Manuela, because you've said the sorts of things that I would like to say, and I agree with you 100%, especially as Manuela just said on the question of inclusiveness for civil society, and indeed giving a stronger voice to the private sector, at least in terms of the achievement of our common sustainable development goals. Now, the talk has been about location, Geneva, and who's doing what there, and also the various different things that the UN system and us as citizens, some of us grey cells, can also do. Now, my remarks are going to basically focus on the gist of the book that Yorgos just mentioned, which is Desperate Hope, Reflections on Survival Pathways for Civilization. And it builds on many years' interactions with global leaders, practitioners of multilateralism, youth groups, and former UN system colleagues, not least facilitated by the Foundation for Global Governance and Sustainability, Yorgos, very much the key person there, and our peacemaking reflection group. It was also shared, that's to say my little book or booklet, with the Interaction Council's 37th annual plenary meeting of former presidents and prime ministers from around the world, which met in Malta in mid-March. And a summary of it has also been more recently published in Belgrade by the Center for International Relations and Sustainable Development, founded by a former president of the General Assembly, Mr. Vuk Jeremic. So basically, this is UN Day, and some people are saying Happy UN Day. It's the day that 78 years ago, when the UN Charter was signed in San Francisco, but for me and for many others, it is not a happy day. The scourge of war continues, and in the past 2 weeks alone, 35 staff of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees have been killed in Gaza, in addition to over 5,000 citizens of Gaza, Palestine, and the thousands who have also been killed in Israel. So in a sense, never has the UN been so emasculated by the divisions between the great powers and the dysfunctionality of the now unrepresentative, if not undemocratic, Security Council. Cold War rivalries also wreaked havoc on the Middle East. And today's conflicts have morphed the clash of ideologies into what I think is an existential struggle, increasingly contemptuous of the universal consensus that underwrote the UN Charter and eroding global norms and human rights, the Universal Declaration, of course, being in 1948. We need a global reset. We need a compromise of interests on all sides, along with a recommitment to those norms and rights. And my hope, and the hope of many others here listening and beyond, is that the Summit of the Future, which the UN will organize in just less than a year from now, in September next year, will help to bring about that recommitment to the Charter, to those norms and rights, and hopefully some kind of a reform of our institutions and our frameworks. Now, fundamental, I think if we hadn't realized anything in the past few weeks, it is that fundamental to many conflicts throughout the Middle East is the Palestinian issue and the double standards that riddle efforts to bring peace between Israel and the Arab world. It doesn't have to be that way, but today's leaders of the region must show the courage and resolve that made the Camp David, the Oslo, and other accords possible. And the rest of us should prevail on them to do so through civic action, through our various voices that we can tap into, and through political leverage. Both Israel and the Palestinians need new leadership on both sides, attuned to the demographic, economic, and environmental trends of the region and the world at large, and to the voices of younger generations, which has already been mentioned by the previous speakers. The future must be built on the present, not the past. And while old harms take a long time to heal, today's grievances must be dealt with upfront on the basis of the rule of law, universal values, human rights, and constitutional norms. Our UN, under-resourced and undermined by the major powers, is increasingly overwhelmed by the scale and severity of crises, from wars and unilateral violations of the Charter to major global challenges such as organized crime, state capture by rapacious elites, resource exhaustion and environmental damage, eroding biodiversity and mass extinctions, rising inequality, mismanaged pandemics, and accelerating climate change. Now, when I say overwhelmed, I mean we can't manage anymore. The UN system and the international community is not coping with these challenges. So what do we need to do? We have other problems in economics with market concentration and the plutocrat dominance of social media. Think Twitter, think any of the others, combined with emergent artificial general intelligence, AGI, and the risk of it surpassing humanity and empowering repression and eroding freedoms. So holding autocracy in check and preventing tyranny, and indeed expanding democracy, civil, political, and economic rights, requires, in my view, two fundamental accelerators, and these I touch on in my little book. One, eradicating grand corruption at the top, for which the Interaction Council is also advocating the establishment of an international anti-corruption court. And two, empowering civil society through full emancipation and equality. I think Manuela would probably agree with that. But also, we should say that civic education and expression, integrity in politics and enforcement of ethical standards, and media diversity and independent journalism are basic pillars for an effective representative and participatory democracy. Creating the UN was an aspirational as much as a political act back in 1945. But there is no point in creating institutions unless they are serviced and made to work. The UN Charter has not been revised since 1971. By and large, it still stands valid for the 21st century, but it needs some small adjustments for the UN system to work effectively and prevent the scourge of war, which remains its most fundamental purpose. Future generations, if any survive, will judge today's leaders, especially those in the Big Five, the permanent veto-wielding powers who are currently obstructing the UN Security Council. And by the way, have you noticed they're the world's greatest arms manufacturers and traders? By the sagacity, in other words, we need to have future generations insisting that these big powers, the Big Five, are judged by the sagacity and magnanimity with which they endorse the substantial changes that are being widely recommended by networks of eminent former statespersons, men and women, civil society consortia, and indeed the vast majority of member states of the UN. We need modern tools of peaceful coexistence to preserve and expand this first truly global civilization on this planet. We need legal norms that derive from the UN Charter and multiple compatible treaties and conventions, and we need ramped up pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. We need equitable financing for our shared ambitions. We need productive investment, not weapons of mass destruction. We need harvests, not horrors, forests, not fires, and plowshares, not swords. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And yeah, I mean, we are encouraged. We are, I think, inspired. Thank you to all three of you. We have to see how we can do it, what role we can play. We're civil society. We have also friends from the Coalition for the UN. We need trying to put together a big coalition and People's Pact for the Future, which will be, let's say, an advisory document for the member states if they want to take parts of it, if they want to take it all. We want to be ahead of them and also thinking for the next 25 years of the UN and global governance. Thanks a lot. Now, whoever wants to take the floor, please raise your electronic hand and have 1 minute, 1 minute and a half, not a long intervention, but so that we can go back to our speakers eventually and have a discussion. We have plenty of time, 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Who would like to ask a question or make a brief statement?
All right, Georges, I'm not sure. I'll raise my hand.
I can hear your voice, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's me.
Jan,
so it's Henk-Jan Brinkman, at the moment, permanent observer of the International Development Law Organization. I think that these are all very good points, but I think we need to really concentrate on a few things that we think we should focus on, whether it's military expenditures, whether it's Israel or Palestine, and mobilize civil society around that. And I think we need to be ambitious, think really high, but we need to concentrate. We cannot, I think, spread out ourselves too thin across too many different issues. And of course, we need to choose the ones that we think are really multipliers, are really having ripple effects across other areas. I think that might be the case with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. That might be the case with military expenditures. And there might be, other issues. The Security Council reform is also something that I think it really is absolutely necessary, and I think Frank mentioned that as well. Whether that is feasible and politically realistic, that's another issue. But I think I'm clear. Thanks so much, Georges and everyone else.
Thank you. Yeah, we have to be focused to have an impact, the civil society also. And of course, you have UN experience. Many of us have UN experience. We know how it works from the inside, from the Secretariat mostly. And please, anybody else who would like to take the floor? It is more formal than usual. The colleagues from the PRG, please do speak. And if you cannot find your electronic hand, you can talk and I'll see you. Carmen, from
Hello.
Uruguay.
I am Carmen Rico from Uruguay. I have been invited by Georgios, and we are here with Malvina from Argentina and from Andrea. We belong to the Global South Network perspective on global governance, isn't it, like Georgios? So excuse me for my ugly English, but I want to to endorse that you have presented and insist in the impact in civil society, like Henk says, and I don't remember your Francis and Manuela Tortora. I think it's very important, this diplomatical level, the representative level, Geneva, New York, all that, but citizen activity is very, very, very important to sensibilize people. Otherwise, the resetting of the global governance will be always in the top and never in the bottom, never in the roots. That's, I think we must discuss different strategies to have a very important impact, like politician activities in the roots with the people. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you indeed. And multi-level governance and all that. I mean, the global is not by itself. Sometimes even in civil society, we go to New York and we talk to the governments there, but we lose the contact with our roots and the real citizens. And thanks for reminding us, Carmen. And now, Peter, Chef.
Yes, thanks a lot, and greetings to all of you, particularly also to the newcomers, a lot of new faces, which we normally don't have on our Zoom meetings. I fully agree with what Frank said at the beginning. The UN Day today is not really much to celebrate, and it is much more reminding us that we see a proliferation of organizations appearing to compete with the UN. We had the expansion of BRICS. We see the G7 taking up a lot of issues, the G20. We see, in particular in the Pacific, new so-called defense agreements coming up in response to the so-called China threat, and so on. There are a lot of new organizations which have come up. We have recently done sort of an Excel spreadsheet with all these new arrangements. So in addition to what the previous speakers have referred to, we see a proliferation of organizations which substitute basic ideas and principles of the United Nations system, not only for peace and security, but also for other issues, be it trade, be it finance. So the challenge is bigger than sort of the deterioration of the UN system as described by Frank in his book. We had a long discussion in Fox about the article, which I think is an excellent piece of work. And in addition to this, or sort of at another level, we see increasingly the challenge within the still reasonably functioning UN system. The challenge is that we need to find agreement on principles, on norms, on rules, with an increasingly diverse representation of governments. We see a massive decline of democracies, and we still insist in the discussions, in the General Assembly, in the other arrangements of the UN and other institutions, that we have not yet found a way to deal with governments who have a completely different understanding of governance. And I think this will be a major challenge for UN in the future, but also for others, how to deal in this very diverse arrangement. We need, democratic elected governments meet with autocrats to agree on principles, on arrangements to deal with an emerging crisis, be it in Palestine, be it wherever. I don't want to use an example, but I think this will be the challenge, because this will not go away. We will see increasingly extremely diverse government arrangements which have to find a way to cooperate at the global level to deal with specific crises, which, for example, Frank has referred to, and to find a solution, where we have to find a way to accept that they are different, that they will not turn into democracies, but they will continue to rule as autocrats, or whatever you want to call it. There's a big variation, but that this will become the future normal thing. And I think what was described earlier, sort of the Geneva bubble, and I call it specifically a bubble, will not be the norm. It will be maybe the exception. And we also see increasingly that these sort of different forms of governance do not want to deal with civil society, not the civil society understanding we have. They will organize and arrange their own civil society and put the other part of the civil society behind, I don't know, bars or whatever. No? So I think that the challenge is much bigger. We do not only see a crisis of the UN institutions as described, but we also see an increasingly diverse global government situation, which will not follow the same principles as we have advocated in the past. I hope I made myself understood, but I think this is a challenge which I think we have discussed this in our circles and increasingly, and we're not really making a lot of progress. But I think this is the emerging reality, and we have to understand the global emerging reality before we discuss about reforms of the UN arrangements as we know them from the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. You introduced a major factor now that I would like also to comment on, but we'll go to the speakers after. The next Peter Popchev, who could introduce himself. You're not a member of our group, a regular member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kostakos. I'm glad that a Greek neighbor is heading this group. I'm a retired Bulgarian ambassador. I have dealt with multilateral affairs throughout my professional life, which extends more than 35 years. I continue to do research, and I had a small NGO on energy and climate. As many speakers touched on the issue of the potential contribution of civil society, and having in mind the big potential of your own group, I would put it to you as a modest suggestion that you perhaps could consider establishing a process in which NGOs from countries across the globe could get organized and enter into a network for at least a year through teleconferencing, discussing all those matters that many of the speakers touched on, and which are in the minds of all those people who care about our planet, care about our peace and our climate. And then at the end of this year, we could have NGO conferences, either regional in the 5 continents, and then a global one wherever. But my idea is to sort of extract from the NGOs, again, across the globe, all the precious ideas, all the sentiments, all the wisdom that they can contribute. Why? Because presently, as we all know, the United Nations is in something of an impasse. The governments, even those who want to contribute or to move the whatever aspect of the international order, they are faced with a wall. So our last reserve, as it were, is the civil society, but civil society must have a certain, if not institutions, at least some sort of formats. So again, I put it to you as a group to consider how to organize the NGO potential of the world to perhaps contribute to the the debate on a new global order or the upgrade of the existing one. Thank you very much.
And I just wanted you straight away, but there is this coalition that Fox is an active member of, the Coalition for the UN. We need C4UN. I put some initial information there, but I can also give you the URL for the website. And they do, and we do organize, let's say we were the co-organizer of the European regional meeting. We had global meetings in New York a couple of times. Online also, we meet quite often. So please send me your information afterwards. We can integrate you into, there is a WhatsApp group, etc. Whoever else represents organizations. We already have even a proposal, a preliminary pact, People's Pact for the Future, for the Summit of the Future. So, and there is a global conference been planned for April next year in Nairobi, in collaboration with the Secretary General's office and the Global Communications Department of the UN. So anyway, we don't agree on everything again, but there is some structure, and you're welcome to join. That was an immediate response. Stephen, and then we go back to our speakers, then we can have another round if there is interest.
Thank you, Georgios. I've just returned from Manuela's Center of the UN World, which is Geneva, where I teach a course called UN Function and Dysfunction. And quite frankly, with the state of the world and the state of the UN, it could well be titled What Ought to Happen and What Actually Happens, because the amount of dysfunction is so widespread, and that is somewhat depressing. I think there are two things we can be doing during this discussion. One, of course, is to express our own very idealistic views about what ought to happen in the world and in the UN. And then more pragmatically, what it is that this group can do to make the world a better place. And I think I agree with everything that has been said hitherto, and especially with the last speaker. And I know you've qualified that with more information, but Peter's right that it's actually mobilizing civil society which can perhaps help us to move things forward. I've always worked on the basis of a formula which I think is incontrovertible, which is that change equals, it's an equation, change equals information plus activism. And that's the only way that change happens. Good information, better information, true information, combined with people who are change agents and want to change the world in the direction that information is pointing. Just pick up on two. So to answer my own question about what this group could do, I'm referring to a couple of things that Frank said. Frank being always full of jewels of wisdom, a couple of things I thought were really very important. One is working on the questions of corruption. There is a corruption convention, of course, and it's governed in Vienna as far as I know. And as far as I know, the supremo of corruption for many years in the UN has been a Russian, which would not necessarily be the most judicious choice. And the other thing, so working on calling out corruption, referring to corruption, helping develop norms for corruption. I know that's part of what is done in Vienna, but I think supporting that work is very important. And the other thing I would say is, and the words came from Frank. He said, legal norms based on the UN Charter. You know, for a long time, I've been wondering, since we have a charter and since everybody from Venezuela to North Korea to Norway purports to abide by the charter, it needs to be strengthened. And maybe there's a way that this group can think about how legal norms can be applied to the terms of the charter. So I'll stop there. Those are my 2 P. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. And you have so much experience also with the UN, and now you teach also. We have to take time to digest all this, but I think Frank wants to say something. So let's go to the speakers briefly for their feedback, and then we'll go to the rest of the people who want to participate. Frank.
Just very quickly to pick up on what Stephen has said, he's absolutely right. And in fact, Transparency International tracks as much as it can the way and extent to which the world is tackling corruption. And it has to be said that over the past few years, there has been very, very little follow through on the UN Convention Against Corruption. Most countries are doing next to nothing. And this is a fundamental problem because corruption now, especially grand corruption, is undermining our political processes, undermining the representativity of democracy and polluting our institutions. And that's what needs to change. And the other thing is that just simply to segue on that the whole question of civic empowerment, the emancipation of people at all levels, and indeed equality, especially gender equality, is fundamental to enabling people as such to hold leadership accountable. And the question of the accountability of political leadership is absolutely crucial in order that we change the way the world works, the way countries function, and how they interact together. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Of course, the corrupt and the corruptors, I suppose, all should be covered by such sort of action, right? So we have to see all aspects of it.
The alligators and the allegations.
Yes, exactly. What about, I think, Manuela, if she wants to say something now, and then Yuriko?
Yes, just very, very quickly on what was said, and I include myself in the role of the civil society. I think we all agree that it has to be enhanced, supported, developed, whatever, great. But the sticking point continues to be the mindset of governmental machineries, including in democratic, really democratic regimes that just do not pay enough attention to what comes from the citizens. And it's not only because Greta Thunberg, for instance, was arrested a few days ago in London because the environmental cause is bothering too much. It's even worse than that. Just 3 days ago, on the 19th of October, there was a huge demonstration in Israel, including Jews, Muslims, and Christian women, thousands of them, demonstrating and marching and singing together for peace. Not even one single headline was devoted to that news. You can find in YouTube the song and the video of the demonstration. So this is just to tell you, to show how far we are from the inclusion of civil society at the policy-making level. It's not even influence, it's just they are ignoring. And I know particularly well that at the level of the policymakers, and particularly foreign affairs ministries and leaders in general, they just look at the participation of civil society as something as a decorative thing that has to be looked at, but certainly not taken fully into account. And I'm talking about democratic regimes. So I will stop here. It's just to give a reminder of where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuela. And we have a video from the song, with the song that you said, these women from all over united sang. And we can play it at the end if you want. I also loved it. Perhaps the song itself is from a previous time, the video. Right. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Yuriko.
Sure.
I just wanted to support the suggestion made by a previous speaker about focusing on just a few issues or points or activities, maybe even just one, thinking of how big and diverse a group this is, which is great. But I think it has to be an activity that isn't overly complicated, where it makes it relatively easy for all of us around the world and our networks, not just this group, to contribute to and have some kind of concrete impact. Because I think otherwise, large groups like these, especially scattered all over the world, I think there has to be some way of creating momentum. And so we need to focus on one issue. Maybe I thought the suggestion made of the issue of military spending is something really important and something fairly concrete that, it's possible to have an influence on. And it's also very important to be persistent and perseverant and constant, because otherwise you're not going to have an impact. And I was thinking about one contact I have. It's an advantage of being in a small country like Costa Rica, a former president of this country, who had said, I'm really eager to help out on any issue to do with peace. So, let me know. And somebody like that, an activity that can be interesting for somebody in that position, and where we can show that participation by him or any other person can actually have an impact. So yeah, I think it would be important to think about what exactly. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuriko. And just to tell you that in the past, also academically, they say trying to coordinate civil society is like trying to herd cats, because each one of us exists because of one issue that we want to promote sometimes, like a gender issue or youth, or the Global Resilience Council is one big issue for folks. But then we could perhaps have one core common issue, and I think what you said about military spending and to end the diversion of resources from SDG implementation, for example, to military spending, which is now happening even more. So we could focus all together on that, and then we can still pursue our respective causes, because we cannot stop doing that probably. But that's also some food for thought in terms of organizing ourselves. But thanks a lot. And then I see first Seri, Sam. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Mr. Kotakos. Yeah, it's my pleasure to attend this meeting. It's new for me, and yeah, I'm a president for the Khmer National Liberation Front, which is based in Denmark, and I have worked for democracy here in Cambodia, and I try to advocate at the international stage to find a peace solution in Cambodia, and the rest about human rights issue and democracy. Yeah, because the regime in Cambodia, they violate the Paris Peace Agreement. So at this stage, I can see like conflict is around the world right now, the war. And I at this point, I would like, if like the all, especially the United Nations, take the concrete action to find peace for the people around the world, for peace for everyone. Because now, like the war in Ukraine and Middle East, in Israel, Palestine, also in Cambodia is not yet peace, because human rights violation is the serious as I always raise awareness at the United Nations Human Rights Council, also at other places at international stage. But yeah, and thank you for UN and always raise concern about the human rights in Cambodia. But the action is not yet taken right now, and still the human rights violation in Cambodia should take place. So if we could take the priority to find a peace solution. Yeah, for example, if, for example, right now, the P5 cannot discuss or find a solution for find peace. So if, for example, we can invite like a Security Council or Paris Peace Agreement to talk together to find peace, not only for Ukraine or Palestine, Israel, but also like peace in Cambodia, because we have suffered for a long time. 3 million people were killed, and they try continue to violate, and Khmer people desperate around the world. But now our voice has not been heard, and so I try to advocate, raise awareness. So I hope that the UN can find a solution for peace. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. We're talking about the peace architecture or infrastructure for peace globally among countries, but also within countries. And yeah, it's a long discussion, and there are problems all over. Of course, not only the big ones like the Middle East or Ukraine, Russia, that can blow the world apart in a nuclear way also, but everywhere in your country and elsewhere. Of course, yes, thank you for bringing that dimension to our discussion.
Thank you.
Michael. Please unmute.
So sorry. I'd like to raise the question about how are we going to get a true breakthrough in how to empower and give an equal seat at the table to civil society. We've been working on this for a very long time, and very good work has been done, including international networks of NGO, civil society that are bringing forward the issues and voicing their opinions. But in the end, I think our biggest problem is the perception of an adversarial relationship between government and the civil society. Government is very, very defensive when you talk about bringing the civic side to the table. How are we going to deal with that? We can talk till we're dead about the importance of civil society, but this is a political game. This is something that we have to be politically smart about. And so how are we going to do that? I have seen, and I'm sure many of you have seen, a coming together and bringing together of civil society and government at local level, doing some very exceptional work. I can list a number of places where I have seen it. That is something that gives us hope, but it's never brought up to the level we're talking about. I think the UN has a particularly important, vital role here. It's not we around this important dialogue who are best able to do this. It is our colleagues on the ground who know the importance of this partnership between civil society and government. They know who in government are sympathetic to this, who are committed to this. We don't know that, at least I don't. I would have maybe some time ago, but now I don't. How do we do this? I think that there is a need to explore this. And maybe one of the ways of doing that is creating a partnership forum of civil society and government. That has to be done very carefully, very smartly. We need the help of our colleagues on the ground, bringing together those who are already working together. It may not be at the highest levels of government, but it's a start, bringing them together around whatever topic suits the purpose, and building a public face of this partnership, and gradually moving it into the higher level. I think this is not going to be easy. It's going to take some time, but I think we need to work on this. And I think those who are already leading the networks on the NGO side can be great facilitators of this, but I don't think it can be done by them alone. We need the ground people to help us do it. So this is just, I know this may sound naive to many. This is ridiculously impossible. I personally don't think it is, but it needs sensitive and very committed work. And I think it can happen sooner than we think. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And you have done it from both sides. You have been a UN official on the ground, and you have tried to help local civil society. And Suvira may complement what you said and see how we can achieve a better coordination and input. Thank you, Suvira.
Yeah, thank you, Georgios, and thank you to all the speakers. You've raised some very important issues this morning, and I've been listening very attentively, and some of the speakers have stressed some of the points I was going to, so I will not go at length. But what I was thinking is that as we are looking around at all the conflicts, what we see is that peace is not a top-down approach. You just can't say, let's have peace, and things are going to happen from the top down. So I support all the speakers, and there have been many who have said that you need to involve the local communities, you need to have partnerships. And this is one thing I would like to stress again, that it's not just civil society, women's organizations who can galvanize peace. They need the support of the governments, intergovernmental organizations, private sector, and we've seen this in work done in other countries. When you come together with all these various groups, you can get much more done and more sustainably. So what we are looking for is peace that is sustainable, that really has a buy-in from all partners, not just civil society, not just governments. And I think that is a point that you all have emphasized, and Michael did too. And I would like to very much see whether we as PRG can work towards that, beginning small, but really taking that further, especially now as we see increasing conflicts everywhere. It's not just the Israel and Palestine situation now, but we are still having other situations around the world, some which are not talked about. And there we need to see whether civil society and government and intergovernmental organizations, private sector, can work together as a voice for peace. So I just like to briefly emphasize those points. Thank you.
Thank you, Subira. We can only do it together, of course, for sure. Thanks for pointing to that. And Natalia. Vojna. Vojna means war, Vojna, somewhere. In some languages. Where are you, Natalia?
I'm originally from the Balkans. I left Yugoslavia when the war started. I'm a Rotary Peace Fellow, and I'm the founder of Our Future First. Yes, it does, unfortunately. My family used to be Vojnovic, and due to Ottoman history, something changed. But long story. I stand for peace, and one of the ways that I support it is through the way that much of the speakers have articulated it, and thank you so much. And that is focusing at the grassroots and focusing on the relationships between people and the governance at the local level. I very much appreciate the document that was created and the suggestions of the UN World Citizens Initiative and how to include civil society at the local level. But where I take pause is, in what ways can that form of governance be also tied to biophysical realities and to the environmental crisis? Because we're in a triple planetary crisis right now, with climate change and pollution and loss of biodiversity. So what if we continue governing ourselves in this abstract way of ethnicities and nationalities rather than basic human decency, where we're also not respecting other life forms other than our own? And if we were to start organizing maybe across watersheds or another biophysical container at the local level, that will build a social infrastructure and a way of relating to one another that is more peaceful. Because Lao Tzu said that if there's to be peace in the world, there must be peace between nations. If there's to be peace between nations, there must be peace between neighbors. And if there's to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the family. And if there's to be peace in the family, there must be peace in the heart. We do need to focus on all the skills as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's also the narrative that I think Yoriko and folks also is trying to find, how to connect all these levels and really have a code of conduct for all of these levels, because it's the only way to really bring the major transformation that we seem to need. But anyway, sorry for intervening. Then we go to Jean, and then we start with our speakers again. We're starting with Frank, and we'll finish. I think we have come to the end. Jean, please.
Hi, thank you.
Or Jean, sorry. Yes. Yeah.
That's great. I got really interested in the environmental issues a long time ago, almost 20 years ago, when I saw what pollution was doing to children around the world. And it's a big concern for me, and it drew me into financial issues. And this last spring I've been part of ACUN, so I've got involved in some of these efforts leading up to the Summit of the Future. But I agree that civil society really needs to have more of a voice. And the UN, I mean, I live in the United States, so I look at newspapers, the traditional newspapers, although I suppose a lot of people get social media information. But, you know, how many people in my area really know about what's coming up for the UN and all of that? And I think there needs to be much more coverage of it. I agree with that. The other thing that was mentioned was corruption. And I have been reading about efforts to regulate crypto, but when I look at what happened in the Middle East, and it was partly funded by crypto assets, that I think we ought to just try to put a ban on cryptocurrency because it adds to all the corruption issues that we already have, and I think it undermines financial stability and monetary policy. The other thing that I've come up with over the years is something called a currency sustainability standard, because I focus on financial stability as a real link with social stability in many countries around the world. And I'm reading in the financial news day after day after day about how many global South countries are suffering by depreciating volatile exchange rates. Part of this is because of the US dollar being internationalized. So my currency sustainability standard idea would really be more, maybe not appropriate here, but more for the IMF, where we would get back to stable exchange rates. And those exchange rates would not be based on market values or a US dollar or any domestic currency. They would be based on how well a country provides peace in its country and around the world. It would be based upon lowering its greenhouse gases, which would give a bump up to a lot of global South countries who have not contributed to the climate change. It would be based on renewable energy facilities development, basic needs of people, and of course, transparency, because you can't have trust without transparency. It wouldn't just be an individual country's efforts, it would be an effort of countries to help each other out, and they would both get credit for raising the value of their currencies. That's it in a nutshell. I don't know how you'll take to it, but I just thought
if you had a paper on it, if you could prepare something, I mean, we would like to promote it because there are initiatives beyond GDP to bring elements also of the triple planetary crisis. Natalia talked about it yourself, how the natural resources are used by a country or how their state. Also beyond the Bretton Woods institutions, there is another initiative bringing in the SDRs, special drawing rights as a global currency, and issuance of those for developing countries. And now what you said, please, we want to work on such innovative proposals. We'll see how they can be quantified or whatever. Thank you. Now I see Rebecca and William also. Frank, could you wait for very brief interventions? Yes? Okay, Rebecca, and please.
Hello, everyone. I apologize. I joined the call a little bit late as I was in person at another event that I saw Georgiosa online for on the Summit of the Future and the road there. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens for Global Solutions, and I'm also the co-convener of the Washington Working Group for the International Criminal Court. And as I've been participating actively through my organizations and the consultations around the new agenda for peace, one observation that I've made is the curious absence of the mention of judicial institutions and legal accountability as a prerequisite for lasting peace. And some of you may have joined yesterday when in the same room I was in this morning, my organization and several others launched a new civil society initiative called Legal Alternatives to War, or Law Not War, that seeks to support the jurisdiction primarily of the International Court of Justice as a mechanism for the peaceful resolution of disputes. I think the ICJ is little understood, certainly under-resourced, and currently only 74 states accept compulsory jurisdiction over contentious disputes between or among states. This isn't the only way in which situations and cases reach the court. There's also the opportunity to seek advisory opinions. Currently, as many of you might be following, there is a novel case before the court. It's been seized of the question of what states' obligations are with regards to climate change. This will be seminal in shaping the future of states' understanding of their responsibilities. And there's also the use of treaties through compromissory clauses that looking to courts as opposed to other means, i.e. the use or threat of violence, as a mechanism to resolve disputes. So we now, as civil society, are supporting a declaration led by a group of 34 like-minded states, authored in the first instance by Switzerland and Romania, that seeks to get more states to accept compulsory jurisdiction of the court, and also supports issues like the nomination of credible candidates based on merit and adequate resourcing for it to do its work. I'll put a link in the chat, but I just wanted to raise this initiative. It's brand new. We're very proud of it as a means for civil society to actively engage with an existing institution that is envisioned by the UN Charter, but certainly could be fulfilled to its utmost potential in a way that it's not currently. So thank you so much, Georgios, for letting me have the plug.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, I was there at the opening yesterday of this initiative. I think it was yesterday, right? And it's world peace through world law, again, going back to those basic things. And it's better to fight the courts and pay lawyers than buy arms and kill each other, right? I fully agree with you. Thanks for pursuing this with all the team there. And now William Flappin, and the last speaker before the other speakers will comment the initial speakers. Thank you, William.
Thank you very much. I'm Bill Flavin, a former military officer, former director of the Peacekeeping Stability Operations Institute here at the Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. A quick thought on the activities here. I think what is needed is a collective narrative, a compelling narrative of the success of civil society, because I have found that institutions it is invisible to some of the institutions as to what's happening. I know this while trying to teach and inform the United States military itself. They have no concept of what civil society is and what can offer and how they can move ahead. And this includes their activities in Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places. It's kind of an invisible activity. So I think one thing that I think we could do collectively is to build a strong cross-cutting narrative of the successes and begin to slowly infiltrate and educate, so to say. Just my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, and we have to educate broadly and educate ourselves and everybody. And I think these opportunities here are really, I learned a lot, and thank you all for contributing. And let's see how we take it further. Perhaps our speakers have ideas on what to do next, Frank? Please unmute, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, thanks, Yorgos. I wasn't sure if you were calling me there. Actually, I had raised my hand only to support what Natalia Voino was saying, because the issue of watershed management, and that's just to take one example of what she was giving, is fundamental to peace in the Middle East. The whole question of the Jordan River Valley and the other Tigris, Euphrates, Litani, and so on. And in fact, it may interest some of you to know that former Israeli Prime Minister, who has had a troubled career, Ehud Olmert, in 2008, in his peace proposals to the Palestinians, which Mahmoud Abbas failed abysmally to respond to, and which were almost the same as the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, as he said to us in a panel I moderated in Baku earlier in this year, he said that there were basically four things that Israel was offering to the Palestinians at that point in time. Essentially everything they wanted: the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, some adjustment for settlements that would remain Israeli, but compensating territorial accessions or let's say transfers from Israel proper, and Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, to be the capital of the Palestinian state, and in fact not to be under the sovereignty of Palestine or Israel, but under five countries: Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the United States, and Israel and Palestine would work together, a little bit like the UN partition plan of 1947. And Abbas didn't say yes but he didn't say no. Or if you wish, he didn't say no, but he didn't say yes. But important to as a footnote to that observation by Olmert was that there were a host of other agreements that had been negotiated between the two sides at that time, basically on environment, on water, on electricity, on airspace, and so on. So these things were already agreed, but they were conditioned on acceptance of those four primary elements of the peace deal. And of course, it didn't happen. And I think at today's point in time, it should be actually not so difficult once this conflict in Gaza subsides, hopefully, without any expansion beyond escalation and so on, to go back to the Arab Peace Initiative, which is still upheld by the Arab countries, and to the Olmert peace proposal, make the various changes that are necessary, but actually conclude a real deal. I think that's what we should all be trying to get done in the Middle East, because if we can manage it in the Middle East, finally, after so many years, so many wars, and so much death, and such dysfunctionality of the UN, then maybe multilateralism will have more of a role to play in the future. Maybe we can then get the P5 to come together and go to the next level of international re-engineering. And I'm fully conscious of the issues posed by Russia's aggression and so forth. But again, then you have to go to what Rebecca is saying about law, etc. So that would be it. I hadn't intended to summarize everything everybody else said. I'm going to leave that to you, Yorgos, but I do want to thank everybody for their contributions, which I have found absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And I have worked a bit on the Middle East, and I know this history of missed opportunities and frustrations and things getting worse instead of better. If we can change that, really, we may change the path of history or the direction of history. Let's see. I can see Yuriko with your hand up.
I just thought that it might be important to think about what the purpose of this group is, because if we do intend for it to be a group that works together to make some kind of impact together on specific issues, again, I think it's important to try to identify what that is, because I think there is some urgency here. And going back to the issue of narratives, I mean, there are points in history where narratives shift sort of irrevocably, and it's difficult to sort of get it back on track once that happens. Or maybe it's just a group where we're going to discuss things freely and, leave it at that. But and I think that's fine also, but it would be good to know, where we wanted to go. Thanks.
We want to make a difference, I think. Yes, not only talk, and thanks very much, Yuriko. It's not only the PRG here, we are more people, but we are a big group in all the ways that we meet and our networks. So what about Manuela, a final word?
Yes, thank you, Georgios. Final word.
Just a minute.
What I see on the screen and in this kind of debates of civil society representatives is that there are several categories of civil society organizations. Those that are think tanks or have a research capacity that can produce substantive products to be submitted to the policymakers, which is absolutely necessary. And those, another big category, and Grace Cells belongs to that second one, those that are more equipped for advocacy, for dissemination of UN values, so dissemination of the work of others, and training, and particularly conveying to the young generations what we learn. This is the kind of things that Grace Cells does. So I don't know if around these two big categories, I'm simplifying, you know very well that there are in between also, yes, but I mean, if we can sort of establish a structure with specific goals that belong to each one capacities and skills, So I'm just flagging the idea there, but certainly we form a club, an alliance, where all the functions and all the features have to then come together again to mobilize more civil society, but also to mobilize, as we said, the policymakers. At the end of the day, they have really the final word, and they have to be our main targets, whatever is the priority topic that we choose. I will stop here, Georgios, and please don't forget, it was just very quickly mentioned, the Bretton Woods institutions and the power that they have. Just to remember us that they are still around and out of these kind of discussions, usually confined to the UN traditional organigram, while they are not on board. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuela. Thanks for reminding us of that, because yeah, they are parts of the broader UN system, but they have a special status and they have the power of the money, and they don't come or don't play with on the same terms. And we don't know perhaps how to influence them. But yeah, we have to work together. There is a coalition for the UN we need. Please register. I put the URL there of the website to receive the announcements from there, to participate in various meetings. Also, if you need any clarification, if you want to connect with anybody who was here, send us a message at info@fogs.org, info@fogs.org, and we can put you together, and we'll try to have more occasions like this in our various groups and all together again. Thank you very much. I think I won't say exactly happy UN Day, but happy day of reflection on the UN and the world and how we can improve both of them. And thank you very much for your presence and active participation.